Hello, thank you for having me, everybody. And I'll start by answering the question maybe a lot of you are wondering, but are too polite to ask. I am not bloated, I'm pregnant, so in case you're wondering. So if I could define my fellows year in one word, it would be questions, on that note. The 9 months I spent in Raleigh were filled with questions from my amazing director, Ashley Crutchfield, from other fellows, and from friends from home who kept wondering where I was and what was a fellow. So generally, I love questions, but there is one question that I always dread, and that is the fun fact question. This is where, as a writer and a people pleaser, I get into trouble. The storyteller side of my brain takes over, and without my control, I say something completely untrue to make them happy. Over the years, I have said, quite accidentally, that I'm a twin. I'm not. That I was born with an extra arm. And one time, I accidentally told a really sweet older lady from our fellows church that my dad works for the CIA. This would have been fine if he actually did, and I completely forgot about this incident after the fact, which made for an incredibly awkward encounter when my dad came to visit. She asked what my dad did, and when he answered, truthfully, a chemist, she winked at me. So now you know the real reason why I had to leave Raleigh after the Fellows program. So the Fellows year for me was a year of asking and answering questions, answering the like questions a million times. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? The fun fact question. But among our group and in our classes and at our roundtables, we asked much harder, much more complex and confusing ones. And at the end of the year, I was left with a lot more questions than answers. My Fellows year was one marked by the sharp lines of life and death, the death of a friend from home, the death of beloved people in our Fellows church. In the face of death, I think everyone in my group was forced to ask questions we wouldn't normally ask about why we are here, about why the present matters, why today matters, why it matters that the sun shines or flowers grow when everything is so temporal. We are forced to ask things like why joy and sadness are important, why we are human beings with emotions, what we can learn about our Creator from the way we are and from the world around us. We learn that maybe the worst thing isn't to suffer or to lose somebody you love, but to live an entire life with your nose to the ground, never questioning your opinions or your existence, never wondering about what the days we have or why they matter. My Fellows year taught me so much about life, confidence, friendship, fellowship, but it also taught me this. There is great importance in being a person who is unafraid to ask. This habit of asking questions, of wondering, of refusing to take life and people at face value is what made me decide to start writing. A year after I finished the Fellows program, I enrolled in an MFA program in creative writing in Pittsburgh. To cover my housing and tuition, I worked as a resident director in an undergraduate international girls' dorm. We lived in what used to be the servants' quarters of an old mansion, and my husband, bless his heart, spent 2 years with a horde of undergraduate women parading in and out of our apartment at all hours of the day. My job was to supervise a staff of 5 resident assistants, all women. The amount of time we spent together made it similar to the Fellows program, only this time I was the director. The biggest jolt to me when I started my new job was the realization that I was surrounded by students and adult staff who were more interested in their Instagram and Snapchat feeds than in having a meaningful conversation. The real world, I learned, does not take kindly to sitting for hours discussing whether fish have personalities, what kind of food we'll have in heaven, or how we can be most fulfilled in our jobs. I was at an incredibly liberal school, and my staff was comprised of people who lived lifestyles and philosophies very different to mine, where tolerance was such a high priority that curiosity and questioning was all but eradicated. Everything was, well, that's just your way, and whatever works for you. So how do you wake up a world that's gone numb? I think that's the issue for many of today's Christians, and we are going about it by trying to speak louder. Instead of trying to understand and engage the different worldviews, we've made signs and posters and have set out on a parade to prove ourselves right, to win every debate. We've refused to acknowledge that we have questions too, either because we are scared or because we've never stopped long enough to know. Jesus could have conducted his ministry from a cold, opinionated distance, but he didn't. He made friends, he lived life, he asked questions of people, and he answered them. So in an attempt to encourage my resident assistants to think critically and as a group, I began asking them questions, many of which I learned in my fellows curriculum before every meeting. I had them write down goals for themselves, dreams, plans for before and after graduation. I had them write down interesting things they learned about each other and about their residents, and had them share those with me during our meetings. We discussed poetry, literature, great quotes, haltingly at first, but eventually with more fluidity and enthusiasm, until at the end of my year, some of my RAs were texting me a poem they just read and wanted to talk about. We talked about religion, relativism, where life starts, why every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. At the beginning of the year, these girls could not escape my apartment fast enough. By the end, they hung around for hours after staff meeting, wanting to talk more, wanting someone to listen to their next big idea or plan. How do you wake up a world gone numb? You stir up dreams, inner longings, the parts of the soul everyone wants to share, but many of us lack the language to convey. You ask questions. You become curious about everything. You take nothing at face value. Now, none of my RAs were Christians when I started, and I don't know what seeds were planted, but I did get to witness firsthand young women coming alive, being asked the things no one had ever taught them to think about. As fellows, you have been given a year of time to ask and be given questions. You have been given time to think, to wonder, to allow your soul to come alive as it uncovers truth and longings the world often drowns out. Part of your calling and a habit that will serve you well is to ask questions as you go forward about everything. Be curious. The world needs your opinions, your ideas, yes, but first it needs your questions, your curiosity. I will leave you with a quote from one of my favorite authors and poets, Wendell Berry. It may be when we do not know where to begin that we have begun our real work, when we don't know what to do that we have begun our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. That and always have a good fun fact.